You're listening to Straight No Chaser, the only show to quench your talk radio thirst. Some programs dilute the issues. We only serve the hard stuff. Old school, new school. Grab a glass and welcome your hosts, the Chief, MBZ, and Pastor C.
Of course, in the background, you hear the rapper Drake in his hit song Energy that describes his enemies.
I got enemies, got a lot of enemies.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of enemies running wild in cities across the country, particularly in Chicago and Baltimore. Welcome, listeners, to another edition of Straight No Chaser, where we never dilute the issues. We always serve the hard stuff. And of course, I'm the Chief. And as always, I'm joined by your girl, Ambeezy.
Hello.
And Pastor C is out of the area tonight. And we have an amazing guest host tonight, Dr. Tyrone Powers, who is the director of the Homeland Security and Criminal Justice Institute at the Anne Arundel Community College in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. He's also a retired FBI agent, and he's also the owner of the Powers Consulting Group. So welcome, Dr. Powers.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on with you, to be a part of this.
Yes, and we are so glad to have you here, Doc. And of course, Doc and Ambeezy, violence occurs in cities across the nation every hour of every day. And unfortunately, it's been unrelenting in Chicago and Baltimore. Let me give you an example. In 2017, over 1,025 citizens, 682 in Chicago, 343 in Baltimore, were killed between those two cities. Just recently, over a 3-day period, 59 people were shot and 6 were killed in Chicago. And Baltimore has already recorded 185 homicides in 2018. So tonight, we want to talk about who are these enemies of peace and tranquility, and what will it take to stop them from killing? Is it the police? Is it the courts? Is it the community? Now, there's little disagreement. It is completely unacceptable to lose over 1,000 citizens in 2 cities alone to violence. But let me be clear. This is not just a police problem. It's everyone's problem. Teachers, politicians, lawyers, students, business owners, preachers, anyone who lives, works, or plays in these cities and their surrounding areas owns this. So with that being said, Dr. Powers and Ambeezy, what's going on? Talk to me.
Well, before I answer, let me remind our audience to call in at any time at 702-425-7789 or live chat with us during the show. I actually wanted to ask Dr. Powers, one of the most interesting viral videos that I have recently seen showed that the Chicago PD used a van full of tennis shoes during a sting operation. What did you think of that whole situation and using that approach?
Yeah, that approach is kind of counterproductive. It is counterproductive, and for a number of ways. First of all, the devastation that we see in many of our neighborhoods, whether it's in Chicago or Baltimore, came about as a result of not only the drug epidemic, but also over-policing. In other words, when you did so many raids, you targeted the community on a regular basis, unlike what we're doing now with the opiate addiction, where we have a large drug problem, but we're not raiding homes in white neighborhoods. And so the community is already devastated. And then in the midst of that devastation, that evolutionary process that brought about that devastation, you set up sting operations to tempt people who are in a desperate situation economically anyway. So when you do that kind of operation, when you put a truck out in the community to get people to come get it, you're not trying to get the hardened criminal, because you're targeting and making criminals where there may not be any, because individuals who are in desperate situations economically are going to try to take advantage of a situation where there's an opportunity for them to have some economic gain, and they may not think of it. It's a crime of opportunity is what they were setting up. It wasn't a crime. It wasn't a situation or a sting to reduce crime, to reduce violence, to reduce drug use. You're actually creating an environment to increase crime. And then, as we all know, that once some young people get involved with crime, they continue to get, because they feel now they've already been stigmatized as a criminal, and so now they maybe commit more crime. And you're starting that cycle. That sting operation made no sense whatsoever.
I agree. Actually, it was interesting because when I initially saw the video and read a little bit about it, I actually ended up reading about it because there's a rapper from Chicago named Vic Mensa. And what he was doing was he announced online that he was launching a sneaker giveaway. And, once I read more about it, it was because, the community in Chicago felt like this tactic that they were trying to use was sort of like entrapment, because when you put a truck out full of brand new Nikes and Christian Louboutin shoes around these kids that barely have anything, of course they're going to take them. They might not even necessarily be thieves. And I also agree that, we have murderers out there. We don't need to be, not saying that, stealing isn't bad and the robberies aren't bad, but it's like we have bigger fish to fry, and you're trying to make these kids go down for stealing some brand new sneakers. Like, that's kind of crazy to me.
And Doc, as we look at the level of violence in both cities, kind of talk to us a little bit about what you see as some of the causative factors that may be contributing to this nonsense.
Well, there's no doubt, and we cannot mitigate and dilute the fact that this is an evolutionary process, that where we are today and how we got here has a historical origin and root. Now, some people will say, well, I don't know about the historical origin and root, but I know that the neighborhoods are violent, that too many people are dying, and we need to do something about it right now. But let me tell you why it's important to even analyze that evolutionary process of how we got here. If you go to a doctor for a doctor's visit, they try to find out the origin of your sickness, where it started, and because they believe, and we believe, that if we can find out the origin, then we can backtrack and reduce it with some concrete solutions that will change the condition and the situation. So this violence that we have now, we know, my dissertation for my PhD dealt with the decline of black institutions post-integration, where we began to economically support others rather than supporting ourselves. The best of us moved out of communities that were depressed, and that's logical. But and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not even faulting the people who moved out, because if you're in a better economic situation, you don't necessarily want to leave in a depressed community. Right. But the problem was we left them both physically, spiritually, mentally, and academically. In other words, we had a complete separation. We went from segregation from the white community to segregation from those of us who needed the most help. And that's where we find ourselves at today. So in many of these situations, the young people who have become violent, or the people who have become violent, and the murders and the crime and the violence that we see, that drives all of us to a point of being of living in a life of fear, because none of us wants to be the victim, no matter what the cause of it is, can only be stopped if we understand the origin, and it can only be stopped in a proactive way. Right. The police agencies, the police officers, the police chiefs, the police commanders, the people who come up with strategic policing plans have to develop strategic policing plans to take all of these things into consideration, because as we were just having a discussion, you can't tell me you have great police leadership that is involved in dramatically reducing crime that they are setting up a truck full of Nike shoes. Who thought that was a good idea in a city full of violence that reduce the violence. And so all those things become important. And that's what we're seeing with we're seeing young people, to be quite frank with you, and I know this is hard for some to conceive, that are completely hopeless. Many of us now are not are living in situations where it's hard for us to see the world through the eyes of the young people, the very young people who are dealing in those depressed situations. I was in my old neighborhood where I grew up a few weeks ago. A local television station was doing a story on youth and so on and so forth. And I went in that neighborhood and I said, what if the neighborhood is run down, boarded up homes, drugs, heroin addicts on the corner, drugs being sold. I said, what if I was a young person, 7, 8, 9, 10, and every morning when I got up, I looked out, that was the landscape that I saw. Now, I'm not only looking for escape by using alcohol and drugs, I'm trying to find some meaning to this thing, and balance at least put some excitement in my life if that is the view I see every single morning. And so for the people who are coming up with programs and coming up with solutions and coming up with strategies, they're going to have to kind of see the world through the eyes of the people who are living in those depressed, depressing, oppressive situations and say, what would I do for excitement? Would I care about killing another human being? Because I don't even know if I want to continue to live in this situation. It's like being on death row, but you're living in your house in a city and you already feel you're on death row. What difference does it make whether you execute me next year or whether I execute someone else tonight leading to my execution? That's what we have to understand, and then we have to change the landscape.
And with that being said, Doc, what do you think are some of the things the Chicago PD and the Baltimore PD can do to bridge that gap? Because there definitely appears to be a disconnect in terms of the police and the community doing this together. Now, I know there are some good things going on in both cities. I know both cities are doing programs and activities and outreach to bring the community together. But what do you think is that missing thing?
Well, at the core of it, both in Baltimore and Chicago and in other cities, but mainly we're talking about Baltimore and Chicago now, there is at the core, at the center, an antagonistic relationship between the police and the community that does not lend itself well to dramatically reducing crime, even though, as you said, Mike, the police cannot solve it by themselves. What happens when you have an antagonistic relationship between the police and the community, not only can they not solve it by themselves, but they actually exacerbate the situation. So the programs that we're trying to put in place in Baltimore, that they're trying to put in place in Chicago, bringing the police and the community closer together and getting rid of rogue cops and bad police, because bad police make good police into bad police in the eyes of those, in the eyes of the beholder, the perception of the people. You've got to fix that relationship. And I know that sounds trite, but you've got to fix that relationship, because if you don't fix that relationship, again, not only are police not the solution to reducing crime, they're actually helping embellish the kind of crime, or actually making the crime worse in these particular communities.
Sure.
That can be done with strong police leadership. And you know this, Mike, strong police leadership on every level of the police department. The first-time supervisors, we have a massive recruiting effort going on for police officers here in Baltimore City, but it doesn't really matter if you bring on young police officers who have the right ideas but put them under supervision that still see the community as an enemy. And we can start fixing that tomorrow. People always say, well, these are long-term solutions to these situations. No, these are things that can be fixed tomorrow with the right leadership, the right decision, and the right goals. And in many cases, in cities around the world where you have seen a dramatic reduction of crime, it's the police, it's the community, but it's the people who actually design the cities who are saying, this neighborhood right here. Because we know how to design prisons to reduce the likelihood of violence in prisons. We know how to design military bases to reduce the likelihood of a terrorist attack. There are people around the world, and this is where I think that we become myopic in our thinking, that have designed cities, the very architecture of cities, to make sure that crime is reduced and the people feel that they're in a safe place. But in many of our communities, we know for a fact that some of the communities in Chicago, I was there recently, some of the communities here in Baltimore are almost designed to actually escalate crime. They're actually a place that you feel like is from some movie or some horror flick where crime should